Yeah, but sometimes there was always something. We traveled with J.C. Watts for a couple of days, and he was interesting, but he was ultimately he was kind of a boring guy.
Yeah.
But we were driving to watch him go to the J.C.'s, some small little town, and Steve was there this thing. Remember when we looked up, we see the sign says, "Get tough on crime, elect Rambo district attorney." Okay, we're speaking? Okay, real easy one. You asked me what I've learned about this kind of a project. I mean, throughout all the work that I've done, I've gone to countless coffee, places where people are drinking coffee at dawn, in restaurants, and where people hang out, and they're always talking about three things, besides their families. And they're talking about the weather, they're talking about sports, and they're talking about politics. Now, this is, a country where people are talking about the fact, well, everybody hates politics. But I mean, something else is going on. What do you think politics fulfills in people? Why are people interested in politics so much? You come from a neighborhood which is famous for Tip O'Neill saying all politics is local.
That's the politics you hear people talking about, local politics. The politics that means anything to people is politics about people they know. So you don't find everybody discussing the federal deficit and the Republican plan to reduce it or the Democratic plan to reduce it, but you do find everybody in a heated discussion about whether in Massachusetts, for instance, whether the Speaker of the House of Massachusetts should or should not resign because he just admitted that he's a tax cheat. But he's a hell of a guy and people really like him, and that's what people fight about politics. It's visceral.
Was it what what means something to you in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's changed for people over time. What makes Boston a particularly political city, I think, is frankly, it's the Irish nature of it. This is an ethnic group that used politics to climb the economic ladder. So politics was a part of everybody's life here growing up. The city was overwhelmingly Irish when I was young. 70%, I think, of the city of Boston was Irish. It's now about 22%. So it's not the same city that it was. But for people in midlife, my generation, you grew up with politics the way you grew up with the Red Sox. You talked about it at the dinner table. It had something to do with your life because your state rep got dad a job on the MBTA or got your mother into the PO. There was a real connection between the guy who represented you and your life.
Is that still the case in politics today?
I think it is in a large measure for...
What is? Sorry.
I think constituent service, what that really means is get my brother-in-law a job. And I think for a lot of people, that's what politics has meant here. That's what it's meant. That's been the connection to the politician here. It's less and less true. It's become less true of the Irish because they, in fact, did climb the economic ladder. So they don't need their state rep to get them a job in the post office. They're doing all right. And the ethnic groups that are coming along behind the Irish in this city haven't used politics in the same way, haven't learned that politics is a way to get economic power.
Well, how about politics as a reflection of culture? I mean, our whole reason for doing this series is saying that if you look at politics, you're going to see America.
Right. Well, if you look at politics, you're going to see America if you look at regional politics. You are never going to see America if you look at Washington. Washington isn't American politics. That's where you send your politicians and you no longer recognize them once they get there. Real politics in America is the politics of place, is the politics of identifying with who your constituents are, where you came from, and you certainly see that in Boston.
So keep going with that in terms of how examples of culture are being reflected in politics. That's great.
In Boston, for instance, where else but in Boston would you hear about triple eagles? Does anybody outside of Boston know what a triple eagle is? But in Boston, if you look at the Massachusetts State House, you know that it's dominated by triple eagles. Those are white Irish Catholic men who went to Boston College High School, Boston College, and Boston College Law School. And you can't cover politics in Massachusetts and not know what a triple eagle is. I assume no one in Minnesota does. But that's what American politics is.
Is there a political personality, a kind of person that runs for office?
I think there have been distinctive kinds of personalities in different places in America, and I think what is a political personality has changed largely because of television and paid advertising, which carries political campaigns now. So what you see is kind of this homogenized version of what a politician is. The glad handing you used to see in the street, the hail fellow, well met, people don't have to be that anymore because they can script themselves or be scripted by a political consultant. But that's what politics was. And the politics that's the most vibrant that people relate to is that guy, that woman who they really know and identify with.
So how does that inform the electoral choice? I mean, when you vote for somebody, how do you think you're dealing with this? I think you actually wrote about this in terms of you're following a city councilwoman around, and you noticed the difference about how many times issues actually got mentioned when they were campaigning. I mean, how do people make their choices? Do issues have anything at all to do with it?
Well, in the race for the Boston City Council, issues have nothing to do with anything. For one thing, the Boston City Council doesn't have a lot of power to do anything.
But how about broader? I mean, how important are issues and how important are how you feel about the person?
I think how you feel about the person is pretty basic. I think the issues give you the floor, give you the foundation, and then you build on that. I mean, we have a Senate race in Massachusetts between an incredibly affable, popular Republican governor and a very liberal Democratic guy who's kind of a stiff in person. He's not at his most comfortable in interpersonal exchanges. People aren't going to vote, I think, for Bill Weld or John Kerry because Bill Weld's more affable. Issues do count at a fundamental level. These two people represent such fundamentally different philosophies that you have to decide which philosophy represents you. And then you have to deal with whether this guy is a guy you want to have dinner with. But the reality is, when you get to the United States Senate level, none of us are going to have dinner with them. So what difference does it make whether he's a great dinner companion?
You covered the State House for a while?
I did. Yeah.
So you've met lots and lots of different politicians. Why do people run for office?
People run for office for lots of different reasons. I think in the old days, people ran for a job. I mean, I think in Boston, being a politician was like being in the post office. I mean, it was a civil service job. It was a steady paycheck. And in Massachusetts, people stay on Beacon Hill for 30 years. Our leadership is turning over now. It's funny, as the millennium is coming, we're feeling a kind of seismic shift here, is that all the things that have traditionally been true in Boston are changing. But we have lifelong politicians here because it was a job, it was an income. Other people run for reasons of ego. I think the most disturbing thing to me when I covered politics in Washington, going down there with this sort of civics textbook kind of mindset about what I would see, was how rare you got that connection to the issues. That you thought people went down there to do something in some kind of Daniel Webster-ish fashion. And you got there and mostly the Senate floor was empty until there was a roll call vote. I think in local politics, you see much more engagement. You see much, and the issues are much closer to the surface, much closer to the surface. We have a Senate president who just left politics for academia, although he's got no background in academia. He's found himself a good sinecure in retirement. And when he talks about what he accomplished after 30 years in politics, he talks about very local, parochial kinds of issues. What was his biggest disappointment? That he didn't get the state government to agree to send financial aid to the parochial schools. It's amazing to me that after 30 years in public life, that's your grandest disappointment. But he is so close to his constituency, and that was such a visceral issue for his constituency, most of whom fled the Boston schools during desegregation, that they could have used a few bucks to help pay their kids' parochial school tuition. That's who he identified. He went to the Massachusetts State House to represent his neighbor, to take care of Mrs. O'Malley's problem with the street light, to make sure Mr. Finnegan had a job, and to make sure that Mrs. McNamara's daughter's school tuition got paid.
Actually, could you do me a favor on that?
Yeah.
To de-bulgerize it.
Oh.
And actually, Steve, I like the wider shot a lot more.
Okay.
Um,
Just very.
Okay. Can you talk about, can you actually use the exact same examples, but in terms
Yeah.
of what do politics mean, what a constituent service means?
Right.
Use those examples for us, because it'll be a lot easier to use.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
I mean,
Tell me how to do it, and I'll do it.
no, I mean, constituent service to me means helping so-and-so do this, helping
Right.
so-and-so do this. So
Right.
what does constituent service in politics actually mean?
What it means in
What I'm supposed to, by starting by saying
Right.
constituent service means?
Right. Constituent service means in a local community. It means getting Mrs. Finnegan's brother-in-law a job. It means taking care of somebody's tax problem. It means, Mr. Hogan can't get that pothole fixed at the corner of the street. That's what people expect of their politicians. It's what politicians have traditionally done for their neighbors.
So, are all politics really local? Let's go back to when you were growing up.
Right.
Okay, what are your...
You got a little bit of hair, other side.
Other side.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Yep.
Okay, the politics, when you grew up in North Cambridge?
If you tap it down. So,
There.
great. Not to.
I'm a newspaper person. I'm
Well,
supposed to
I-
look
No, actually,
like
it's
fashionable.
It looks nice.
Some people would blame me for that.
I wouldn't care.
Okay, good.
What are your first memories of politics?
I think my first memory of politics is Tip O'Neill's white head. How he always had white hair, I can't quite figure since I was young then, I'm not so young now, but my overriding memory is Tip in the front row at St. John the Evangelist Church at the 11 o'clock Mass. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew what a prominent member of that community he was, because he got Mrs. Finnegan's brother-in-law a job, because he took care of people's needs. Tip O'Neill was my introduction to politics.
So what are people's, this is sort of going back to the, what does politics fulfill in people?
Mhm.
What are people's expectations? I mean, are there, and do those expectations differ over time? What were the expectations then, and what are they now? Because I think you write in one of your columns about how yesterday's constituent service is today's influence peddling.
Right. I think yesterday's constituent service is today's influence peddling, because it was a much more homogenized community when I was growing up. And the fact that Tip O'Neill was an icon when I was a child, it's because everybody in my neighborhood was white and Irish. It was easy for him to be the icon. North Cambridge isn't all white and Irish now, so he can't be an icon to people who don't identify with him. The things that helped my ethnic group get a leg up in this community, the fact that the representative from the neighborhood was an Irishman who would help you get a job, who would help you with a tax problem, what good did that do the Hispanic person who might have lived down the block? Nothing. So the politics of inclusion for us were the politics of exclusion for someone else. And that's much more stark now as a reality, because we live in a multicultural world now. We don't live, although this is a very segregated city, we don't live in pockets of ethnicity in quite that way politically.
That's interesting. I grew up, reading about, reading the great books of politics. One of them was The Last Hurrah.
Right.
And when I finally moved to Boston, the politics here, to me, weren't that interesting anymore. Hardly anybody seemed to vote for city council elections and mayoral elections. What happened?
Television happened. I mean, politics was a very different thing in the age of Curley. If you read Curley's biography, if you read The Rascal King, for instance, it's Jack Beatty's wonderful biography of James Michael Curley, hundreds of thousands of people came out for rallies for the mayoralty. It's unimaginable now that you would get 1,000 people to come to a rally for the mayor. They might watch a debate on television, but there isn't that kind of physical connection with your politician that there once was.
Why is that?
Because I don't think people see politics.
Actually, can you start by saying there isn't that
Oh.
that physical connection with politicians anymore, and then explain? So.
Right. There isn't that physical connection with politicians anymore, I think, because people don't rely on them in quite the same way. They don't fulfill the same function in a community that they once did. If your aunt was sick, the local politician made the connection that got the doctor to come to the triple-decker to take care of her. They're not that go-between anymore. And in part, a lot of the sense of community in a city like this is falling apart because that glue isn't there anymore, and no new glue has come to replace it.
Well, what about the politics of suburbia? I mean, because that seems to be where everybody moved to. I mean, how is that different? Because now a majority of Americans live in suburbs. What's that? What is the consequence for American politics? Is all the color and life out of it then?
Well, I haven't seen any life or color in suburban politics. It may be there, but I don't see it. I mean, my feeling about the suburbs is people sleep there, and they send their children to school there, and they live there, clearly. But I think that kind of urban vibrancy that politics once represented is clearly gone and not duplicated in bedroom communities. And it's what sucked the life out of urban politics, is the people who fed that life moved to the suburbs. So when a mayoral candidate in Boston goes to Mrs. O'Malley's door and he's looking for these 17 children in that family that he grew up with, and he's counting on all those votes, they all moved to Hingham. They all moved to a suburb of Boston. They're not there anymore. Mrs. O'Malley may be there. Mr. O'Malley may be there. 2 or 3 of the children may be there, but everyone else is gone. And that's drained a lot of the life out of politics in the city.
What about, there are political worlds that exist. I mean, again, I saw some of the stuff that you wrote where you were talking about the world of pundits and consultants and people that you call wise guys. How does their political world differ from the political world that we, the voters, know?
I don't understand the rise of wise guys and political pundits and consultants in this country. I mean, I don't understand the prominent role they play. To me, they seem so wildly out of touch with real people's concerns and what real people worry about in their daily lives. People worry about their children's school. They worry about enough health care. The things that consultants preoccupy themselves with are matters of appearance in politics. They aren't matters of substance. But I think it's all a reflection of that detachment between a politician and the people that they represent, is that you have this just one more layer that separates you from the guy who's supposed to represent you.
Well, that separation seems to be a lot on people's minds these days. I mean, one of the stranger things that we've seen doing this series is that if you tell somebody or start talking about somebody who's a politician or somebody whose profession is politics, people think this is not an honest profession. They have a very negative view. But on the other hand, when you say, how has this changed my point of view? I don't know if it's changed it, but that, after 3 years, the people that I find who are most passionate about what they do are people that are in politics. I mean, politicians, people that are involved in public policy are incredibly passionate about it. Maybe musicians are as passionate about what they do. So how do we get this dichotomy? A population that thinks that politics is dishonest and not an honorable profession, and people that are totally passionate about what they do in politics.
Well, there's a dissonance there in what the public really thinks. The public thinks all politicians are dishonest, and they think that Congress is corrupt and inept. But ask them what they think about their congressman, and they think he's a great guy, and they think he's effective because they remember the time they called his office when they needed something done, and they got a reaction. I think people have very conflicted feelings about politics. It's slow. It's deliberate. It takes an awful long time in this country to get things done because democracy is slow and cumbersome. That frustrates people. People want answers. They want them quickly. They want things done fast. And that doesn't happen in American politics. So it leads to an enormous amount of frustration. Because there are a lot of crooks and fools in American politics. And people feel victimized by that.
There's a lot of crooks and fools in almost every profession.
Yeah, but you're not paying their salaries.
When you were at the State House, what was the level of political dialogue like? I think what I'm getting at over here is that the public has a way of looking at American politics and what public dialogue is like, and I wonder if they have any idea what the real political dialogue is like.
Right. Well, in Massachusetts, the public and political dialogue at the Massachusetts legislature takes place behind closed doors, so the public never gets to hear it. It happened in the Senate at the podium, where the Senate president and a few of his key advisors would decide what bill would be taken up and what wouldn't be. And those of us in the press used to sit in the back and just have to wait and see what flew out because there was no real public discourse. I think the public expects things to be out there in the surface in a way that they simply aren't in American politics. Everything is a quid pro quo and a deal in the back And that's not necessarily bad, because your vote for my pet bill and my vote in exchange for that, may turn out to benefit everybody's constituents. But that is largely how it works.
Does that mean that politics, I guess what I'm getting at over here is that politics to a certain extent is compromise, but compromise has a bad name these days.
Well, I'm not sure that compromise has a bad name. People in their daily life know compromise. None of us live in the black and the white. We all live in the gray. I mean, people know that life is compromise. But in politics, the problem with the whole notion of compromise is they think that you're giving away the store, that you're selling out their interest. But in their own lives, they know that when they're negotiating with their boss for a raise, they're not going to get what they asked for when they went in. And they'll be lucky if they get half of that. And they may go away perfectly satisfied to have half of that. But we have this absolutist notion about what politics can achieve for us, exacerbated, I think, by the tone of the political debate in the 90s, which is not civil. And you have talk radio, which inflames people into think that if people disagree with you, or people who agree with 80% of what you say and not 20% of what they say, that there is some epithet that should apply to that person. That person is a fascist or a feminazi, and that kind of insightful language has denigrated politics in America, because it goes against what people know from their own experience, that life is compromise. You don't get everything you want.
Do you think most people have any idea what it's like to run for office in this country?
No, I think people don't know what it's like to run for office, and I think they'd be horrified to find out. They may see a local candidate for office at the local coffee shop, or they may, if you live in New Hampshire, you bump into a presidential candidate 6 or 7 times in a primary campaign. But to the grinding demands of running for public office and of raising money, I think we would have campaign finance reform now if people understood the kind of money it takes to run for office in this country, even for small offices.
Have you ever imagined what it would be like to run for office yourself?
No, I can't imagine it. I wouldn't do it in a million years.
Do you have friends that have run for office?
No. I like it on the side of the equation. I mean, I think the people in journalism are as impassioned about politics as politicians themselves. But I think what excites a lot of us is the public policy aspect of it. The issues that inflame us, it might inflame a politician. We get to have a say in without having to actually go do the work of trying to craft the legislation that will make something happen.
I know though a lot of people take issue with maybe not so much print people, but people like us, and they say, well, you guys simplify this entire thing. I mean, you turn it into a sports game in which there are winners and there are losers, and that's it. Who won, who lost, and it's sort of like, is there any role for people that lose elections in America? It's like Mike Dukakis loses a presidential election, and he might as well have died. I mean, what is the media's impact in this sort of thing? Do we oversimplify politics?
I mean, I think if Michael Dukakis has died politically, he didn't die just because he ran for president and lost. He left Massachusetts behind while he was the sitting governor, and that may have contributed more to his political demise than his presidential prospects, because again, all politics is local. People in Massachusetts are angry at Michael Dukakis for reasons that have nothing to do with the helmet he put on when he was running.
Well, he may have been a bad example.
But you know what I mean. I don't know. Ask it to me in another way, maybe.
Well, in terms of thinking about politics, I was really taken with this whole idea of battlefield metaphors for politics, the ways that we help ourselves understand politics. Maybe that's a way to get into it.
Well, we think we help ourselves understand politics by using battlefield metaphors, by talking about the racehorse, by having winners and losers. But that's not what politics is. Because what politics is supposed to be, what is about issues, is about the fabric of people's lives. People don't run races every day. They get up, they deliberately put on their pant legs one leg at a time, and off they go. They don't to work, to school. They don't run in horse races. And it's easier in the press to cover horse races than to cover the substance of issues. But it is counterproductive in a way, because it contributes to the notion, when you write about the horse race and you talk incessantly about the horse race, you contribute to the notion that politics is either or. Politics isn't either this guy wins and that guy loses. It's maybe the guy lost, but maybe he had something to say. Maybe he contributed to the public debate, and you know what? Maybe that's why he ran.
Do you think people remember that, though?
I think if the coverage of a political campaign is good, if it's a small political campaign where people actually get to see the candidates, where they don't have to have it filtered through us, through journalism, I think people remember. I think otherwise people could never come back from losses and win, and they do regularly.
Can we stop for a second?
Mm-hmm. Let's change tape.
I guess as much as you can, I really like the wide shot,
Yeah,
just because
I'm just
I like.
doing it for
yeah.
stuff that might be.
Yeah, we're just not going to do that much intercutting.
Okay.
I want to go back to the times that you've been out with candidates and people have asked for votes. Just what that process is. I mean, if you had to describe to somebody how people get people's votes, I mean, what you witnessed, how would?
Just wait on this plane to clear so we're not starting over it. Okay.
Okay. How do candidates get votes from people on a local level?
I think candidates get votes from people by listening to them. You watch a politician on the stump, and the politician who connects with the constituent is the one who looks at them, who listens to them. Now, some consultant will tell you, hold their hands and look in their eyes, and this isn't a cheap trick we're talking about. But if you actually listen to people, they're hungry for somebody to tell about the problems in their lives that they can't fix on their own. I mean, that's what politics is. It's community. It's the notion that there is a way for us together to solve what we can't solve alone. And you get people's votes by asking for them, as Tip O'Neill used to say, but you get it by listening to what their concerns are and not presuming to know. There was a television commercial I remember that ran in Massachusetts, and I won't remember the race now. But one of the things that struck me, it was a silent commercial with a voiceover. And the candidate was talking with a group of voters, but only the candidate's mouth was moving. Through the entire commercial, you had an image of the candidate talking and talking and talking, and the voters saying nothing. And I thought, that's a horrible commercial. That's not his role. I mean, if you want people to vote for you, listen to them. They don't need to be lectured to by you.
Well, there's a school of thought, though, that says that politicians provide something else for people. And maybe it's sort of like when I watch Billy Bolger doing this singing business, where politics is, for lack of another word, entertainment. Just another form of entertainment. I mean, do politicians, or did they in the past, also provide that sort of role for people?
I think politicians in Boston have always provided entertainment. I mean, they've always had a dual function. They may get you a job, they may pass legislation that you approve of socially, but they also entertain you, whether they're singing, in the case of our Irish tenors, or simply by their antics on the floor. Those are the things the press covers, and those are the things the public loves, I suppose, about politics. I think it's changed. I think television has changed everything. The mass media has changed everything. People find entertainment in other places. There's been a homogenization in the country that's been destructive to politics. The fact that we all eat the same food and sit on the same sofa and has affected our politics too. We've come to look at them all as if they're the same. And of course they're not all the same. But slowly but surely, maybe even these regional differences that make America so vibrant will be affected by this homogenization.
That's great.
Change tape.
Yep.
Clear tone. Alright.
Speed? Okay, this is good. Personal is good on this sort of stuff. Okay, tell me what you just began saying. You stopped covering politics because?
I stopped covering politics because it didn't seem to me to really reach into people's real lives. I found myself covering debates on the floor of the Massachusetts Senate or the United States Senate and not seeing the fabric of America, the kinds of things I knew people were concerned about. I would write about issues in this antiseptic, institutional way that didn't bring it home to anybody's neighborhood. I found myself really writing about politics when I left those institutions, and I didn't sit in the Senate Press Gallery anymore. I covered politics when I wrote about infant mortality in Boston, and I wrote about the racial disparity in infant mortality rates, where 3 times as many black babies die as white babies. Now, you could cover that in a debate in the Massachusetts Senate about whether we should send more money to the Women's, Infants, and Children program, but you're not going to really understand that program till you're in the neighborhoods and you go to somebody's funeral and there's a mother sitting there with a little white box on her lap and she has to bury a child who died at 3 months old because of malnutrition in America in the 1990s. That's where politics is. It isn't in those beautiful golden domed buildings. It's out there where the people are, where we are. We're politics. That's, I don't know.
No,
I don't know
that's
how to
great.
say it
That's great.
any
No, it's
better.
actually, if you could start that again by saying it's not there, and then it's where we are, and then talk about what we're concerned with, and then why politics is not there in terms of those issues, that would be great.
Right.
So if you can gather up your passion again and do that again, politics is not there. It's
Right.
and then continue that thought as to why that's the case.
I mean, politics isn't there in those Golden Dome buildings. It's where we are. It is where we are. It's who we are. And that's why when you hear political debates, they so often don't resonate for people. The abortion debate. Listen to the political debate about abortion. Do you really think that reflects what goes on in the minds of American women when they have to make a decision about abortion? No, because it's an antiseptic debate that is ideological on one side, on another side. This is an issue that isn't about sides for the woman who is trying to make this kind of a choice. When women talk among themselves about abortion, when people talk about the burden of taxes, they don't talk about it in an ideological way. They talk about it in a very personal way. Somehow that gets lost when you get into these marble buildings. The real concerns of people, the flesh and blood concerns of people, get lost. And that's the disconnect people feel between them and their politics.
How's that happened? And this is the democracy. This is sort of like the strength of America, where it's a representative democracy. We elect people to represent our fears, our concerns, our hopes. So what happened?
It may be that Americans look for some kind of certainty in politics that don't exist in their real lives. They know that they feel very complicated emotions about just about any issue you can talk about. Gun control, abortion taxes, anything you can think of that comes to the floor of the debate in a legislative body. People feel very complicated about those issues. But when they see them played out on the political scene, they have to choose. They have to choose a side. It's not natural. Life is played out in that vast gray area in the middle. That's where we all live. And politics has kind of destroyed that vast middle. It's forced people to line up in ways that don't make sense to them, really. I mean, even when you hear people in an impassioned way talk about their political beliefs, when you sit them down, I think people find that they don't really feel quite as vehemently about things as they say. There's this effort underway to get people on both sides of the abortion debate to try to bridge that divide. No one's going to convince anybody on the opposite side of that issue to change their mind. But for God's sakes, the public discourse in this country has got to ratchet it down. You have got to be able to say, I don't agree with anything you say, but I respect that comes from some very real place in you. That's been destroyed in this country, I think, and not in people's real lives. When they talk about abortion with their neighbors, they're careful, they're gentle with each other in a way that we aren't in our political discourse. You wouldn't offend the woman who lives next door, who thinks differently about abortion than you do. You try to see it from her point of view, even though you don't agree with her. But then your representatives stand up on the floor to represent you in a legislative body, and they speak in a way about the opposite side of this debate, in a way you'd never speak about your neighbor. What happened? Where did the civility go? I don't know.
Why is that? Why don't politicians talk that way anymore?
I don't know if they ever did. Maybe politics is set up to be this clash of opposites, this adversarial relationship. Maybe the appropriate analogy is the criminal justice system. Where the prosecutor and the defense team know that it's a lot grayer than they both tell you in their opening arguments, but that's not their role. Their role is to be an advocate. But where's the search for truth?
You've already told me this, but I want to go back to it again. Our whole idea of doing this series is to stay as far away from Washington as we can.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody came up to you right now like me and they said, if you want to understand American politics, you've got to go to Washington, D.C., what do you say back to them?
If you want to understand American politics, you have to go to the Board of Selectmen meeting. You have to go to the town meeting in New England. Then you'll understand American politics. Because the passions are high, the investment is intense, the knowledge of the issues is deep. If you want to understand American politics, you don't go to Washington, where it's an intellectual exercise and an exercise in ego. You go to the community, where the decisions that will be made by a government body, whether it's the selectmen or the town meeting, affect your life, on your street, in your home. That's American politics.
Is it going to remain that way, or do you think local politics eventually is going to get overwhelmed by this sort of ideological nationalization, suburbanization, Californianization of politics, whatever you want to call it?
No, I don't think it's possible. In some ways I have to take back what I said about the suburbanization having destroyed politics. I think it has destroyed, the suburbanization of American politics has destroyed that kind of romantic era that we all sort of either lived through as children or remember reading about when thousands of people came out to see the mayor give a stump speech. But if you go into the suburbs and you watch what happens when they try to close the local public school and send kids a half a block away to the other public school, and the kinds of passionate emotions that engenders in people, that's politics. That's real politics. When you listen to people talk about the fact that development is out of control in the suburbs, that the developers are running the town hall, that's politics. That's the real thing. It's people trying to get control over their lives and their community, and knowing they can't do it alone. Some monolithic, huge house has gone up next door to you on a lot of land that can't sustain that big a house. You're outraged. But you write a letter to the Board of Selectmen to voice your outrage. You're one person. You form a group of your neighbors and you say, hasn't he done that in another neighborhood, that developer? And you get together and you go to town meeting and you argue for an ordinance to change the zoning laws in town. That happens every single day in America, and it never makes the newspapers. Not the big newspapers, but that's politics.
We have all these people that probably have these kinds of concerns, and they want to reach out to somebody to help them. At the same time, politicians 60 years ago, it was very easy for them to find people that go to these rallies, and people would come to see them. It was part of the culture. What does a politician now do, especially when they can't afford to be on TV, to find people to be able to campaign to? Isn't it become harder for them as well?
If it's hard for a politician to find people, he's in the wrong business. You go where people live. You go where people's concerns are. If you live in the suburbs, and that's what's happened to America, that's where a lot of our voters live. A lot of people in the city don't vote. You want to find them? Where are you going to find them on Saturday morning? You're going to find them at the Little League game, you're going to find them at the dry cleaners, and you're going to find them at the dump. And if you don't know enough to go to those places, then you're definitely in the wrong business. But I know I can't go to the dump in my town during election season and not be besieged. It's hard to get to the dumpster because of the politicians. We're knee deep in politicians at the dump because everybody's got to go to the dump
How does a politician campaign in a dump?
creatively. The politics of the dump are terrific. I mean, I met Elliot Richardson for the first time at the dump. Campaigning at the dump is where you see people, you know, at their real self. You know, they're throwing away the week's trash. You're lobbying against every other politician who's at the dump, who's trying to get that person's attention, and every people leave their cars running at the dump, so you know you got to make it quick and make it fast. So.
God, I wish we would have filmed this. Are there any elections coming up now where you can go to the dump for us?
Yes, there are.
Seriously?
Yeah, there are. Go to the Wellesley dump on Saturday.
If we went to the Wellesley dump on Saturday, this Saturday, would there be politicians campaigning there?
Oh, actually, I think the local. No, it is too late. But you're like 2 weeks late.
It's a lifetime.
Yeah, but you find out when there's a local election.
Uh-huh.
The dump is like the great unifier.
No, I want to go there now because
Yeah,
I've got the interview with the dump.
You gotta go do the dump.
Let me ask you a couple more questions
Okay.
and we'll let you go.
Good. That should be selected.
What impact do new groups have on the political process? I mean, you know, groups that are non-traditionally associated with politics. I mean, you now have Christians involved in politics. You have gays involved in politics. You have Latinos, if one could actually say that Latinos is one block of people in politics. Do they change the political process, or is this part of the assimilation into an American mainstream society?
I think interest groups of any kind, whether they're ethnic groups or there's some kind of a special interest group, change politics dramatically all the time. Because of even if they aren't an activist group, Hispanics, Latinos have changed politics simply because there are whole kinds of issues that now politicians have to deal with, whether that constituency group raises them or not. Bilingual education, all immigration, all these issues about whether Spanish should be, whether English should be the official language of the United States. We weren't asking that question 30 years ago because the Hispanic population wasn't what it is now. We're asking that question maybe for all the wrong reasons now. But whenever a group emerges in this country in any kind of numbers, they can't be denied. They can be kept down, but they can't be denied. They're there, they're part of the political process. I think a lot of new immigrant groups haven't discovered politics, haven't discovered the nitty-gritty of politics, how to organize, how to get people registered. I think when that happens, then they have an enormous impact on the process because they've learned how to use what generations and ethnic groups before them have learned how to use. That this system will bend to anyone as long as somebody has the tools to make it bend.
And what are those tools?
Organization, voter registration, learning how to promote issues.
Start by saying the tools to be able to bend the political system.
The tools to turn the political system to your end are the ones they've always been. Political organization, voter registration, being selective about the kinds of issues that you try to put before the voters. Just simply organizing a ward. I mean, does that happen anymore in America? Do people know how to organize a ward? And if they don't, maybe that's why some groups don't have the power that they think they ought to have. It seems to me that politics lags behind the population. The Massachusetts political structure is still largely white, Irish, and male. The city of Boston is no longer white and Irish. It's only 22% of the city, but they still hold political power. A white Irishman was just elected Speaker of the Massachusetts House. He represents a black district. Now, is he the most representative person from that district? Maybe he is. Maybe his ethnicity doesn't matter. But maybe the people in that district have never organized sufficiently to promote their own candidate. And I think you're going to see changes, and you will. I mean, it's inevitable that you see change in American politics when each group learns how to use the process to its own ends.
And so what's the future of American politics look like along those lines?
I hope the future of American politics, I hope American politics in the future is blacker, browner, yellower, more female. That it reflects the diversity in this culture, which it does not now, and it doesn't for lots of complicated reasons. But mostly I think it doesn't because politics lags so far behind the culture. The culture moves forward and politics is dragged along kicking and screaming. Politicians are always, it seems to me, way behind the people even in their thinking. If you let the people lead, you'll see a government that reflects the actual population of the country. You'll hear women's voices. You'll hear the voices of groups we're pretty soon not going to be able to call minority groups because they'll dominate the landscape just in pure numbers. And the doors of politics have to open up to those people. Those people have to learn how to wrench the doors open. Women have to learn to wrench those doors open because nobody gives up power. Nobody's going to just hand it to you. And you have to learn, just as everyone's learned before you, how to take it. If you want power, you have to take it. And that's true of women, and it's true of blacks, and it's true of Hispanics, and it's true of Asian immigrants. And we will.
So final question, I grew up with the same civics as you did.
Mm-hmm.